It began not with a speech, not with a scandal, but with silence. The kind of silence that bends the air before history breaks. One sentence from the King of England, 26 words in all, has shattered the illusion that the monarchy no longer holds power. Tonight, the balance of British democracy itself has tilted, and at the center of it stands two men. One, a monarch born to rule quietly. The other, a prime minister who believed he could rewrite the rules. What unfolded between them has not only ended a career, it may have redrawn the invisible line between crown and government for a generation. It started as a whisper behind the heavy doors of number 10. Advisors pacing, phones locked away, aides exchanging nervous looks. The prime minister had said something in private that was never meant to reach the public, but it did. The insult was simple, cutting, and unforgivable. He had mocked the monarchy, calling it a pageant for the powerless. Those words leaked, and when they did, they tore through Westminster like a blade. The palace's reaction came not in rage, but in ritual. For 72 hours, Buckingham Palace said nothing, allowing the outrage to simmer, to multiply, to reach every corner of the kingdom. The king's silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. Behind those palace gates, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Late Monday night, an emergency meeting was called inside the king's private study at Buckingham Palace. It wasn't televised. It wasn't supposed to be known at all. But insiders talk, and soon the world would learn that His Majesty had summoned his most trusted advisors, the Lord Chamberlain, members of the Privy Council, constitutional lawyers, to discuss what had once been unthinkable, whether a sitting prime minister had violated the unwritten contract between crown and country. The meeting lasted past midnight. Witnesses said the king's voice, usually soft, carried a steel edge as he uttered the line that would define the weak. The monarchy must defend its dignity, or it will not survive it. Those words ignited panic inside Downing Street. For a century, British monarchs had avoided political confrontation, but Charles, patient, deliberate Charles, had drawn a line. Inside number 10, the prime minister was pacing the floor, face pale, eyes bloodshot. His aides tried to calm him, but he knew it was too late. The palace had already moved. A confidential directive, stamped Operation Sovereign Integrity, began circulating through the highest levels of government. It wasn't a threat. It was a blueprint, a review of the constitutional powers still reserved to the crown. The last time a monarch had ordered such a document, Edward VIII abdicated the throne. This time, a prime minister's fate was being sealed. By dawn, letters bearing the royal cipher were dispatched under heavy security. One to the Speaker of the House of Commons, one to the opposition leader, one to a senior judge of the Supreme Court. The contents were confidential, but within hours their message leaked. The king had urged all recipients to protect the constitutional balance of the realm. That single phrase hit Westminster like a thunderclap. The monarch had entered the political arena, not by speech, not by decree, but by intent. Within hours, social media erupted. Defend the crown and hashtag King Strikes Back had trended worldwide. TikToks of royal processions and vintage clips of Charles's coronation filled the feeds. The palace didn't need propaganda. The people were doing it for him. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds began to gather. Not protesters, supporters. They carried Union Jacks, handmade signs, and photos of the late Queen. "You can argue about policy," said one man on camera, "but you do not insult the king." His words went viral. That was the mood of the country. Tired of chaos, hungry for dignity. Then came the statement. Wednesday afternoon, every British network interrupted programming for a palace broadcast. There would be no appearance from His Majesty, only a statement, brief and devastating. On white paper bearing the royal crest, the 26 words were read aloud. His Majesty remains committed to the unity and stability of the nation. He holds deep respect for Britain's democratic institutions and expects the same respect to be shown toward the crown. Yeah. That was it. 26 words, no names, no accusations, no need for them. Everyone knew who they were meant for. Within minutes, news anchors were calling it the most powerful royal intervention since the abdication crisis of 1936. The BBC replayed it every hour. Commentators spoke in stunned tones, half in awe, half in disbelief. You could almost feel the tectonic plates of British politics shifting. Inside Downing Street, the atmosphere collapsed into freefall. The Prime Minister's communications team scrambled to contain the fallout, drafting clarifications, press releases, explanations, but the damage was total. His opponents didn't need to attack him. The king had already done it with a single paragraph. Pollsters reported a collapse in public confidence overnight. Approval ratings that had been sliding for months now plunged to historic lows. And still, the king said nothing more. He didn't need to. Every photograph of him, walking through Windsor Gardens, greeting veterans, smiling with schoolchildren, was interpreted as quiet triumph. His silence became a weapon more effective than any speech. He had reclaimed authority not through politics, but through presence. By Thursday morning, the crisis had metastasized. Labor ministers began turning on their leader behind closed doors. Angela Rayner, his deputy, confronted him during an emergency cabinet meeting. "You've made yourself the enemy of the people," she reportedly said. "You've dragged the rest of us down with you." The prime minister stared back in silence, pale, exhausted, but defiant. He insisted that apologizing would show weakness. She walked out. That was the beginning of the end. Across the country, ordinary Britons, nurses, shopkeepers, veterans, watched the crisis unfold and felt something they hadn't felt in years. The monarchy standing taller than politics. Local newspapers that had once ignored royal affairs now ran full-page spreads praising the king's composure. In pubs, people debated not whether the prime minister was finished, but how soon he would fall. It wasn't just about one insult anymore. It was about something deeper, a longing for order in a country exhausted by turmoil. Nigel Farage sensed the opportunity instantly. That night, he appeared on live television, standing before a Union Jack, calm, almost regal in tone. "When our institutions are under attack," he said, "silence is not weakness, it is strength, and the king has shown strength today." The studio audience erupted. Donations to Reform UK tripled within hours. Farage had done what he always did best, align himself with public emotion before anyone else. By Friday morning, his approval ratings had surged 12 points. The Reform Party's website crashed under the flood of new memberships. Meanwhile, Labour's foundations were cracking. 3 junior ministers resigned within 24 hours, citing a loss of confidence. Cabinet members leaked messages to the press, furious that the Prime Minister had refused to apologize. Pollsters released a devastating number. 68% of Britons now believed he was unfit to continue as leader. For the first time since he entered politics, the lawyer-turned-premier looked like a man cornered by the very system he once mastered. Inside Number 10, the mood had turned grim. Staffers described him pacing like a ghost, curtains drawn, television off, refusing phone calls. Every hour brought new humiliations, headlines branding him arrogant, tone-deaf, unfit. Even his allies had begun to describe him in past tense. "He was a leader," one aide whispered to the press. "Now he's just surviving hour by hour." Friday afternoon brought the ultimate indignity. The palace released a single photograph, King Charles visiting a youth center in Glasgow, smiling, engaged, surrounded by children. No words about politics, no mention of the crisis. The message was crystal clear. The monarch was doing his duty while the prime minister wallowed in chaos. The contrast was surgical. That image dominated front pages across the nation the next morning. Meanwhile, the tremors had reached foreign capitals. CNN called it the most dramatic royal intervention of the century. French papers dubbed it Le Choc Britannique. European leaders were cautious in public, but privately astonished. Some viewed it as proof of the monarchy's enduring strength, others as a dangerous precedent. But none could deny the symbolism. Britain's crown, thought to be ceremonial, had reminded the world that it still cast a shadow across government. By Saturday, the cracks had become a chasm. Labour's internal polling showed total collapse. Safe seats in Northern England, the party's heartlands, were now showing double-digit swings toward Reform UK and even the Conservatives. In Manchester, a rally of former Labour voters gathered with banners reading, "Respect the Crown." This wasn't just a political shift. It was a cultural revolt. Working-class Britons who once sneered at monarchy were now defending it as a symbol of national unity. At Westminster, whispers grew louder. A vote of no confidence was being organized. Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, and David Lammy met privately to discuss succession plans. The question wasn't if the prime minister would fall, it was when. Yet even as his empire collapsed, he refused to bow. I was elected by the people, he told his remaining advisors, not by a crown. But the words rang hollow, because in Britain, the people and the crown are not enemies. They are reflections of each other. That weekend, Buckingham Palace made one final move. Without fanfare, a brief statement was added to the royal website. His Majesty has been apprised of the current situation and remains dedicated to the preservation of constitutional order. Analysts called it the calm before intervention. Historians knew what it meant. The phrase preservation of constitutional order is a royal signal, a reminder that if government fails, the crown still holds reserve powers, rarely used, never forgotten. By Monday, Parliament was openly in rebellion. The Speaker confirmed that backbenchers had submitted enough letters to trigger a leadership vote. Crowds swarmed outside Downing Street, waving signs that read, "Resign now." Journalists shouted questions through the iron gates. Inside, the Prime Minister sat alone, staring at the glowing screen that displayed those 26 words. Every syllable now felt like a verdict. Across the country, something extraordinary was happening. Church bells rang spontaneously in towns that hadn't sounded them in decades. Shop windows displayed framed copies of the King's statement. Taxi drivers played it on loop through phone speakers. Even school children could recite the 26 words by heart. Britain, weary from years of cynicism and scandal, had rediscovered its spine. And it came wearing a crown. The final blow came from within. Late Monday evening, as cameras surrounded Number 10, the Prime Minister stepped out to address the nation. His voice trembled. He spoke of misunderstanding, of political games, of his respect for the monarchy. But it was too late. The country had already chosen its side. Even as he spoke, chants echoed from beyond the gates. "Long live the King!" That night, the BBC replayed a split screen that defined the era. On one side, King Charles, composed, timeless, walking through the rain outside Windsor Chapel. On the other, a prime minister's face pale with defeat. One represented continuity, the other, collapse. The camera didn't need narration. The symbolism spoke louder than any words. And so a single paragraph ended a political dynasty. 26 words restored centuries of reverence in one stroke. For decades, the crown had been treated as ceremonial, decorative, a relic of a gentler past. But the events of this week proved the opposite. The monarchy is not powerless. It is patient. It waits in silence. And when tested, it reminds the world that real authority doesn't need to shout. It endures. It watches. And when the time comes, it speaks. The Prime Minister thought he could outshine the crown. Instead, he became its warning. Because in Britain, the throne doesn't fall to politics. Politics falls to the throne.